So that's kind of interesting. So we already know we've got bull culture here. So we've got this beautiful leaping bull and these lovely designs. And he's not running in a realistic fashion at all. He's running in this kind of jumping, bouncing style that actually quadrupeds don't do. But what's interesting is what we see happening. And so this figure right here is running up to the bull and grabbing the horns of the bull. And so we think what we've got here is something called a continuous narrative. So write down continuous narrative. And so that means that you have within the same kind of register or the same image multiple moments in a story. And so here we have the leaping a bull. And so we see how you run up to the bull and grab the horns to flip yourself over. You land on the back of the bull with your arms, and then you continue over until you're able to do a somersault and stand up without being killed. We wonder if these people might be what the Minotaur in this myth of Theseus was supposedly eating. This is the spectacle that they were involved in out there on the public plaza. Okay, and just to show you, here we go. Check him out.
Dang.
This guy is doing bull leaping. I grew up on a farm around cattle a lot. And of course, we used to go to the rodeos, and there was one rodeo clown who actually lived about 2 miles from where I lived. So I always drove by his place and wondered, why don't I ever get to see him in his rodeo year when I was little, in the truck with my dad. He was never outside with his rodeo costume on. It was very disappointing when you're 10. Anyway, one of the things he loved to do was when the bull riders would get thrown, he'd distract the bull. He would run up and flip over the bull in a very similar way. Kind of terrifying. And here is a recreation of what that might have looked like. Okay. So we get back here. We are on the mainland. And so they're living life a little bit differently. And one of the things they're doing is they're building huge fortifications. This is not something that you see on a large scale on the island of Crete. They're not building huge fortifications. They have some fortifications, but they're not massive. They're not the defining element of their towns and villages. And here it is. These people are less interested in being involved in trade and exchange and more interested in protecting themselves because they need to protect themselves. And so what we've got here is what's called the Citadel of Mycenae, and it's behind these giant stones. And do you look to see how big these stones are in the walls? They're called Cycladic architecture. It's coming from, not Cycladic. My brain is glitched. Based on a giant. It's the name of the giant was born. Cyclopean architecture. These stones are so big that when later Greeks were visiting these sites, they'd say they must have been made by giants because ordinary men couldn't move them into place. And you can see they've got some really big stones moved in here. And what's kind of interesting is stones can be, if they're big enough, they can be pretty stable. It takes a lot of shaking, for instance, to move them in an earthquake. But it also means that if people are trying to break in, it's hard for them to do. Those people clearly felt like they needed to protect themselves. Now they have a big gateway, and you can see that right here. Now what's interesting is if you were inside and you walked around this part of the wall, over here on a very steep slope is a door where they could come out kind of more secretly and attack from back here anybody who's at the gate trying to break in. So the other thing I want you to notice is we have some uprights. We haven't seen this since we looked at Stonehenge, but they're there. That's been a key part of architecture. We've got the uprights and we've got the stone across the top that forms the lintel. And on top of that, we have this triangular sculpture. And this is called the Lion's Gate because those two animal forms that we see were lions carved in relief, except that their heads were fully carved and attached on. And over time, their heads fell and broke. So all we have are the bodies of the lions. The lions would have been looking out at us. So kind of saying, watch out, be careful. And the thing about this is if you put a really giant stone up here over the lentil's not going to be able to hold a really heavy stone. It's going to break. This is bad. So this shape right here that the lions are on is called a relieving triangle because it relieves the stone of the weight of the other stones that might be put on it. So write that down. Relieving triangle at the Lion's Gate at Mycenae. And then I want you to notice the lions are what we call rampant. They're lifted up in the front, and they're standing on a piece of architecture with a Cretan or Minoan column right there, showing the connection between Mycenae and ancient Crete. Notice that they then use this careful pushing in of the stone that we've seen before to hold the whole thing together. This is a reconstruction of another Mycenaean site, this in a city called Tiryns, and it's showing you the elaborate decorations that are on it. Now, when we were at Crete, we didn't have any rooms that had fire pits in them that were open to the sky, which this one is, to let the smoke out of the building. So they weren't really having big fires in these buildings. And remember, they have lots of open walls to let any smoke they did have out. But here they have to be more concerned. They're enclosing more spaces. And these throne rooms from this era were places where the king of the city would have this fire in order to meet with the gods. And so the patron deity, like Apollo or Athena, would come down and literally sit at the fire with the king. Okay, and at Mycenae, we happen to have some evidence of a significant quality of military culture that we didn't really see when we were looking at Minoan culture. And so we've got this eroded dagger blade, and you can see it's pretty damaged, it's pretty old, but it has gold and silver inlay, and it shows what kind of scene. We've seen it before.
A continuous narrative.
What was that?
A continuous narrative.
It's probably not a continuous narrative. It's also, we don't necessarily see the same figure appearing over and over again. But what's happening?
They're like fighting the lion.
They're fighting the lions.
Yeah.
That same thing we saw in Egypt, we saw it with King Tut, we saw it in Mesopotamia, and so we're seeing it here. This is something that's very common in this region. And so as you're at the wide part of the dagger, you have the biggest figure, then they scrunch down to fit into the space. This guy's dead, he's fallen down, and this lion is attacking, and these lions are running away. It's a heroic battle. And this is the way you put gold on a weapon or silver and still use it as a weapon. As a decorative application on the top, it's not going to affect the ability to kill something. Okay, so what we've got here is that at these sites, especially at the city of Mycenae, so Mycenae is the culture, or Mycenaean is the culture, and which means of Mycenae. And Mycenae is what we call the type site. So in archaeology, that means the others are kind of similar to it, but it has something unique. It has these round burial tombs. And these round burial tombs are made of corbel vaulting to make them have big space inside, space for burials. And so we're looking at the exterior. This is the entranceway, and look, it's fallen out right here, but what would have been here?
Like the thing from the Lion's Gate, the relief triangle?
The relieving triangle would have been right there. So let's take, and notice we've still got the Cyclopean architecture. And then we look over here. This is one of the things we found in it. Isn't it cute? There's some question about whether it actually looked like that. It's a death mask, so it would have been over the head of the body, just like King Tut. You can see it's not nearly so fancy as King Tut. And it's been argued that this mustache has been fiddled with. It doesn't kind of look quite like the eyebrows, etc. The archaeologist who found it was known for his propensity to try to get spectacle and excitement going. And his name was Schliemann. And so he's doing it at this early time too. He's kind of in competition with Evans and even before Evans. And so he might have had a smith work on it. They found 3 of these masks in these tombs. And we wonder, is there a connection to Egyptian tombs, which are underground? And these Cyclopean beehive tombs, as they're called, like this, were covered with earth. So kind of underground. And that we've got these masks, which are the Mycenaean interpretation of the death masks that pharaohs would have been buried with. And so we think we're kind of looking at kings that are buried in the All right, and then something exciting happens. So this is the wrap up for the Aegean world. And the thing that happens is not just the volcano and possible trouble from that, it's that we have what's called the late Bronze World collapse. And so this is all around this area of the Mediterranean. All of a sudden people are moving. They're like fleeing, they're going to other places, they're trying to get into places. It's a massive migration. You could liken it to the migrations we see in our southern border that Europe has seen. Lots and lots of people moving out of areas that are no longer productive and safe and trying to get to safer ones. And so you see all of these big sites that were flourishing in 1600, doing pretty well in 1400, and by 1300, they're all pretty much empty. And there are writings saying, all these people are coming upon us and we don't know what to do. There are also writings saying we're fleeing because there's no food. And so we've got this evidence that there's significant trouble going on. And that seems to have been also associated with local conditions, but also fire environmental conditions. That meant that they were going through a huge, long-lasting drought. So that is the end of that Bronze Age culture. So now what I want you to do is I'm going to break you guys back into groups, and I want you to write 3